He's the Assistant Director of National Risk Management Center that was stood up in 2018, same year that the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, aka CISA, was stood up. Prior to that, he had a variety of roles in what was NPPD, around risk, around policy, around infrastructure protection. This guy is Mr. Infrastructure Protection. Prior to that, he was an analyst at GAO, a whole bunch of private sector stints. And he actually has journalism and entrepreneurship in his DNA, which you don't often see. I refer to him as Mr. Resiliency. He's always thinking about left to boom, boom, and then of course post boom when there is one. But it was no surprise when they tapped him to be the National Risk Management Center Director. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you. Bob, you're on.
Hey, Luke, can you hear me?
Can hear you great, Bob.
Okay, great. Great to be with you, and thanks for the passion of reading my bio. I appreciate that. Appreciate your enthusiasm. It's great to be with you all this year. This is not my first time being with you. I had the opportunity to be with CISA last year. Talk a little bit about the supply chain work we're doing across CISA, but today I'm thrilled to have an opportunity to highlight what is certainly right now our top priority for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, doing what we can to ensure that American voters are going to participate in a secure, resilient, and safe election, and that American voters are going to decide the results of the 2020 election. So great to have that opportunity. I come to you today, Tuesday, which means we're 3 weeks, 21 days away from Election Day officially, November 3rd. But as you've seen on TV, voting is happening already around the country, whether in person, and the lines we saw yesterday in Georgia, or in other places where voting's happening, or by mail. And so we are already active in working with state and local governments across the federal government, the interagency to secure our elections. This is the culmination of a lot of work we've done over the last several years, and I want to highlight that, and I want to use this opportunity to give confidence that we're going to have what my boss Chris Krebs calls the most secure election we've ever had in the United States. With that preview in mind, let me just take advantage of a quick introduction of who I am and what the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency does. Not going to be new to most of the participants in this seminar today, but Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, is the newest federal agency as part of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. As Luke said, we stood up in 2018. And we pride ourselves on a couple pithy slogans as we think about ourselves. One is that we are the nation's risk advisor. Our role as the nation's risk advisor is to be out there looking at systems, looking at infrastructure, looking at federal networks, and assessing where there is risk that can cause national security or national economic security risk or economic competitiveness risk, and constantly putting information together so that we have the ability to give the best advice to other parts of the federal government, to the critical infrastructure community, the state, local community, about things they can do to reduce risk, particularly around cyber attacks, reducing risk to things that could cause systems not to work. And so the nation's risk advisor. And we focus on a sort of a dual track, defending today and securing tomorrow. So that's our other slogan, defend today, secure tomorrow. I'm very much going to be talking about what we're doing right now to defend today, what we're doing to defend the 2020 election. But as the whole spirit of your day is laid out, there are a lot of things we can do to secure tomorrow's IT networks, to secure software, to put us in a place where we have more secure supply chains when 5G rolls out. As federal acquisition policy changes, you're going to have to be thinking about not only what you can do today to reduce vulnerabilities, but thinking long term about designing systems that are more secure by design, where resiliency is built in, where risk is reduced, where there's less attack space, and we're in that together with this community here, working on the things that we can do now to make sure that we can continue to take advantage of this wonderful technology, things we can do through software-defined networks in 5G to have a more secure digital tomorrow. And so we like to operate with both of those in mind: defend today, secure tomorrow. Think about the things that the advice we can give, the information we can share that cause people to more easily take decisions to reduce risk to their systems. As part of CISA, I run the National Risk Management Center, which hosts our election security initiative. National Risk Management Center is a planning, analysis, and collaboration center within CISA, where we bring together folks from across the federal government, the Critical Infrastructure Committee, work closely with state and local governments to deal with the most strategic challenges facing the nation's infrastructure. And there is no more strategic challenge right now than the challenge facing our election infrastructure. As you know, as I laid out, 3 weeks from elections today, we live in an environment where we want to make sure that there is nothing that our adversaries can do to take advantage of our election processes to reduce confidence that the right person, the person that the American voters intended, won an election. And that's really what we're talking about when we talk about election security. So I'm here today to sort of give you an overview of the state of play currently, how what we've done leading up into the 2020 elections has made us more prepared, has made the nation more secure for the election that's going on, and how we're thinking about the next several weeks and where we see the sources of risk and what we're doing to anticipate and mitigate those sources of risk. So pivoting now to talk about kind of our journey to being where we are right now to help secure the elections. Election security and the idea that elections are critical infrastructure, or election infrastructure is critical infrastructure, really was crystallized, the need for national election security in 2016 with actions taken by the Russian government to interfere with the 2016 election, whether those actions were related to interfering through cyber means with gaining access to certain databases, whether they were whether that action was related to some of the hack and leak operations that the Russian government took, or misinformation that they pushed. 2016 was a year where we saw that foreign governments were willing to take, in this case, the Russian government, were willing to adapt tactics to interfere with our elections, something that has historically been going on, but sort of changed and became more acute and intense in 2016 through exploiting digital means. With that wake-up call starting in 2017, the Department of Homeland Security recognized that we needed to up our game in our ability to support state and local election systems and ensure that they were cyber secure. You'll keep hearing me throughout this talk use the word support. It's very important to recognize the core idea, one of the core ideas of our democracy, that elections are run by state governments and local governments, that the authority lies with the states, and that the local governments are the executing agency. And the federal government's job here is to be the backstop against anybody, particularly nation states, that want to interfere with those elections. But the core responsibility for security, the core responsibility for administrating elections does lie with state and local governments, who work closely with a rich vendor community who provide, whether it's e-poll books, election management systems, voter registration databases, or the actual voting machines themselves. That technology is provided by the vendor community and acquired and used by state and local governments. So the federal government comes into this, and CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, comes into this with the idea that we have an obligation to help support national security priority, ensuring that elections are secure. So we entered with that, and that support is around the idea, and I think this has borne fruit, and you've heard us report this throughout, that there are adversaries that are interested in looking at ways to perhaps exploit vulnerabilities in our election process. I'll talk particularly around ideas around things you can do via cyber means, but there's also passing on dis and misinformation and concepts like that. And so, again, the reason we're here is the national security challenge from our foreign adversaries. We've reported publicly as a U.S. government about concerns not just from the Russian government and things that the Russian government may choose to do, but also increased action by the Chinese government and the Iranian government, looking at ways to potentially interfere with our elections. And then you see a lot of because election systems are state, local government systems, you see a lot of the same things you see across state, local, tribal, territorial governments. You see criminal activity, particularly around recently the use of malware and ransomware to interfere with systems that happen within a state, local, tribal, territorial system, and some of that has spilled over a little bit into the election infrastructure environment and could spill over to the election infrastructure environment. So the risk picture we're dealing with are nation states who have demonstrated capability of doing things via cyber means to affect availability, confidentiality, and integrity of systems, and criminal activity for the same reason across state local space, and at least some level of intent to do things to potentially interfere with our democratic processes. And that's the risk environment we're living with. You've heard us talk about it publicly and downgrade some of the intelligence about that. The good news is we are not seeing at this point any sustained campaigns against election infrastructure that are likely to mess with the integrity of the election results. But we've seen enough things that look like they could go in that direction that we need to be hyper vigilant here, and we are getting that information into the hands of state local governments. So that's the risk picture that we're dealing with. I wanted to highlight some of how we're approaching then the risk mitigation imperative, because I think that's the most interesting part that I can impute to this audience. So election security and cybersecurity for elections, which is really what we're talking about, securing hardware systems, networks, software of election officials, has been really a great example of how the public-private partnerships that have been established to secure the nation's critical infrastructure are supposed to work. Coming out of 2016, recognizing that this was a new national security challenge, the first thing that we did in 2017 is DHS was put in place, using models that we'd use for other parts of critical infrastructure, put in place a partnership structure to allow us to nimbly work with state and local government officials, with the vendor community involved in elections. And so, we are able to do what we're able to do now because we worked hard in 2017 to establish these partnerships. The first thing we did was establish a partnership with the U.S. Election Administration Commission to work closely at a federal level with the FBI. And then we quickly recognized that we had to have the ability to work regularly with secretaries of state around the country. Secretaries of state are generally the senior election officials of states around the country, state election directors, local county officials. And so we built council structures similar to how we work with election vendors and the big banks and water utilities and communications providers, IT providers. We built coordinating councils, and we developed a strategy to work together to secure some objectives to enable us to support election infrastructure security. And so we did that in 2017, and then quickly we recognized that the first initial key was, like it is with almost anything in cyberspace, was through regular, routine, process-driven sharing of information, sharing of threat indicators, sharing of vulnerabilities, sharing of intelligence reporting, anything that could interfere with elections. And so on top of the coordinating council structure that we were able to put in place, we turned to the Multi-State Information Sharing Analysis Center, the MSISAC in Albany, New York, run by CIS. We asked the Multi-State Information Sharing Analysis Center to stand up an election information sharing analysis center, EI-ISAC, the Election Infrastructure ISAC. Today, the EI-ISAC has been the fastest growing ISAC that DHS has been involved with. We have over 3,000 members, 3,000 jurisdictions that are members of the EI-ISAC who regularly share information. As I was just talking about, share information about threat indicators, about technical indicators, about what we're seeing overseas in terms of foreign election interference, other threat reporting, vulnerabilities that are reported related to that. The EI-ISAC also enabled us to put in place Albert sensors, which are the state version of what we use in the federal network, the Einstein sensors. We have Albert sensors deployed in 50 states around the country to provide level of awareness of what's going on in state systems. I think the statistic we use is jurisdictions representing 99% of the voters in this country are covered by Albert sensors at this point. There are some states that have up to 80 Albert sensors deployed around the country. Others have a smaller number, but are designed in a way to maximize coverage to ensure that we see anomalous behavior on state election, county election systems there. So putting in place the Albert sensors gives us much richer technical detail. We worked in hard with aspects of the federal government, including the intelligence community, to provide context around anything technically that we're seeing. And then, we have a whole field structure in place through the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. The FBI has their own field structure where we are in regular contact with state local officials as well about things that they're seeing. And so what we've created over the last several years with the EIISEC as really the hub of it, is we've created this what I would say is an incredible information sharing environment for potential cyber threats to election infrastructure. And if you look at where we were previous to the 2016 election and where we are now, we are talking about exponential increase in sharing of information about election, things that could happen in cyber means to election infrastructure. And so when I say things like I did at the beginning about, we have a good level of confidence in where we are, how secure our election is, and what's going on right now in the run-up to the 2020 election, it's because of that information sharing environment. Information sharing environments, of course, also demand negotiations and process development in a degree of trust and confidence that system owners are happy and willing to share the information, what happens on their systems, with the overall information sharing environment. So we have put a lot of effort into building that trust and the ability to share that information. But we now have a rich picture that anything that's going to happen on our election infrastructure systems, and we are ready to address those issues as they happen. The other two parts of this sort of triangle of how we've set up cybersecurity for election infrastructure, of course, it's more than information sharing. It's actually technical security practices being put in place by the systems owners and operators, and then it is preparedness and resilience type information. And so, it's not just information sharing. The other thing we do here at CISA is help provide direct cyber services, just like much of the private community does, to help system owners secure their systems. So at CISA, we have prioritized our own deployment of our resources through our cybersecurity directorate to support state and local election infrastructure systems. So I'm talking about vulnerability scanning and having the ability to, when invited, to do scanning of vulnerabilities so that state and local election systems can take steps to mitigate those vulnerabilities. I'm talking about remote penetration testing, phishing assessments, other ways that we do risk and vulnerability assessments, where we are actually, when requested by state and local officials, coming in, taking a look at their systems and their practices and how the election workers run and administer elections, and assessing where there are opportunities for improvement. This is something that everybody who touches on a state, local network or federal network or a critical infrastructure should be doing. But here at CISA, we're really focusing on providing that ability and support for election administrators. And what we've done through that is you start to see things like more use of multi-factor authentication being deployed because of this, better training around anti-phishing campaigns, more and more election systems are moving to the .gov domain, which is inherently more secure. We've seen more use of endpoint detection. We've enabled more use of endpoint detection, better practices for information, making sure that things are as much as possible not connected to the internet, better understanding vulnerability, and then patching, right? When you talk about ransomware, as I talked about earlier, start with talking about patching. We with the FBI put out an alert last Friday talking about some of the the activity we're seeing right now, including from advanced persistent threat activity around state and local governments that could touch on election infrastructure and some of the vulnerability chaining that the APTs were using. And, the mitigation measure starts with recognizing that these systems are in place and patch. And so, it's not ever going to be perfect, the cybersecurity of any system. Cybersecurity of state and local systems certainly depends on the resources and technical expertise that are available to systems, that the ability to buy and upgrade hardware and software along the way. And that's not ever going to be perfect for state and local systems, but you have seen a real upgrade across the way in terms of the general cyber practices. Couple that with information sharing, and then throw in the third aspect of this, which is preparedness and being ready to deal with, being resilient, being ready to deal with things that could go wrong. And that's been really the other area of focus for CISA as we support state and local governments, helping those governments get in place plans to deal with contingencies, to deal with cyber incidents that could happen. Exercise those plans, exercise at the local level, exercise at the state level. We've done exercises at the national level through our Tabletop the Vote program, and really think through what could go wrong. And then the other angle of that is recognizing that just like with any complex system and potential cyber activity, there are things that potentially could be blips in the system, but really work through the communications of how election officials communicate with local media, working through with the national media. These are the kind of things that might happen, and these are the things that would really be concerning, and these are the things that are part and parcel to the system not being able to work for a little while. That's not going to happen via cyber means, most likely, but we want to be able to quickly break down the idea that just because there seems to be a technical delay that has become a cyber attack. That's not usually generally what happens. And so the exercises, the planning, the communications, the preparedness, so that we're ready to deal with scenarios that could happen. And that becomes really important as we are in this period in the last 3 weeks before Election Day. We are, I'll sort of begin to end here, we are at a period of heightened vigilance across the federal agency. Within the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, both at the national level and at the regional level. We have regular interactions across the interagency with the intelligence community. We're doing regular calls with state and local election officials weekly, where the intelligence community gets on and has an unclassified overview of what's going on. CISA enables that. We have done classified calls. We're moving to a period, in the immediate run-up to election, the last couple of days before the election, then on Election Day, where we will have 24/7 coverage, thinking about everything that could go wrong with an election, anything that needs to be tracked down. We'll have a situational awareness room on Election Day that we work with state and local election officials so that we have a unified situational awareness room nationwide. And then we'll have a federal situation awareness room where all the 3-letter agencies are going in and talking about anything that's going on, quickly sharing information in real time, and having the ability to quickly form an opinion of whether there's anything of concern. We'll be regularly communicating, again, across the federal government. We'll do regular briefs to the media so that we can give the media the most accurate information on any activity of concern on Election Day, and answer their questions and break down any concerns there. And so I think we're well positioned. As I said, there has been, a lot of reporting around things that are worthy of concern. There's vigilance to be prepared for anything that could happen. But we've set up, I think, a pretty damn good cyber infrastructure system, a great cyber information sharing. We deployed the capabilities of the U.S. government to support this mission, to support state and local government, the government mission. And so, it's game day. It's getting close to game day, and we're ready to go. The last message I will end with is, when you talk from a risk perspective, it's always important to remember the consequence you're trying to manage against. And the consequence here that we're trying to manage against is different than a lot of the security missions. Sure, it is loss of functionality of the system, but more than loss of functionality of the system, it is the loss of confidence of the American voter that American voters decided American elections. And that's a complex thing in a political environment, and I recognize that. But within the technical aspects of that political environment, did your vote count? Did anything happen in the system that caused you to have any concern that your vote didn't count? From a security perspective, that's what we're trying to manage the risk against, to give every voter confidence that nothing happened from a security perspective that made their vote not count. We have out there around the country more audibility than we ever have. We have more use of paper backups. We have good confidence that we'll be able to track the voting. We've done what we can and what needed to be done to secure systems. And I want the American voter to feel confident that their vote counted. And you know, our public message to the voter is, with that in mind, please plan, participate, and be patient. As we move to November 3rd, the plan is know how you're going to vote, have a plan to vote, make sure you do what you can to, on your side, to make sure your vote counts, be a participant in the electoral process, even if that means stepping up and being a poll worker, and then be patient. It's going to be a dynamic election process. I didn't spend my time talking about vote by mail or COVID right now, but you all know we are voting in a different environment. That we're voting in the middle of a pandemic, which is something we have not done as a country in 100 years. And you know, the pace of which we're going to know who won elections might be different than in past years. And so we urge voters to be patient. That's all part of the overall resilience. That's all part of the process of having confidence that our elections were secure. We want the voter to plan. We want them to participate, and we want as citizens to be patient for the results. So I will stop there, Luke, and I think I have a few minutes for questions, and appreciate
a lot of meaty questions here. Good topic. You know, people used to ask all the time, what keeps you up at night? And, you know, we used to always say, you know, the only thing that keeps us up at night is the things we don't know, because everything else we can fix. Yeah. And it sounds like you all are doing a lot of things to make sure you're scrubbing, thinking through, tilling up any type of issues and making sure that you're prepared for that. And that should be comforting to everyone listening to this broadcast. Here's a question. How has CISA addressed counterfeit ballot generation and submission? Now this gets back to, you know, sort of the integrity of the environment there. Yeah,
so I mean, again, CISA doesn't work on counterfeit ballots per se. In our work with state and local election officials, we recognize that the systems in place to ensure that ballots are secure, the barcodes, et cetera, the attestation of voting, things like that, you know, it is the judgment of us, the FBI and others, that it's hard to come up with a counterfeit ballot plan at any level of scale. There's a lot of protections against counterfeit ballots. It's not really our responsibility to do things other than to make sure that cyber means aren't being used to produce counterfeit ballots. But we've seen no evidence that it's possible to produce counterfeit ballots at any significant scale.
Fantastic. Here's another one. What's the biggest threat to citizens working from home from a registration perspective? You know, think of it from a cyber perspective. Any thoughts on that?
So citizens who are registering to vote, I mean, so some of the threat to citizens working from home through cyber means are similar to other things we put out with telework and everything here. Here, you know, from a ballot perspective, it's, you know, making sure that your registration took, and you know, there are ways that's part of participating in planning as a voter, you know, follow through, confirm that you're registered. Most states have backup systems in place, or backup processes in place. If for some reason that there's a dispute of whether you're registered, you know, generally you can vote, and then that will be looked at post the election to confirm that you are an eligible voter. So, you know, I think there's nothing particularly unique about at a home environment. Just confirm you're registered and avail yourself of the process to ensure your vote is counted if you're somebody who's eligible to vote.
Bob pointed out those 3 Ps. Make sure you all take a look at the CISA website, and you can see where they talk about that. One of them is being prepared, and I think this falls into that category. Does the federal government offer any tools to the states that help assess and find unpatched systems? You touched on this a little bit, but you want to talk about sort of what CISA does in that regard?
Sure. When invited in, sort of in active scanning when invited in. We have tools that pull off some of the best COTS tools to identify vulnerabilities in unpatched systems there. Obviously, you know, as we publish systems to be concerned of, we would expect elections CISOs and CIOs to look at that. And then we are right now piloting a passive scanning to look for unpatched systems. We call it cross-feed, and we are working with state election officials who have encouraged us to use the passive scanning on their systems. It's not something we're going to use the word scale. It's not something that we're going to scale up in advance of the 2020 election, but I think there's some promise in the cross-feed work.
Well, we certainly have heard from the expert. There's a lot of instrumentation out there. There's extensive info sharing. I think about the FEMA situation with these 5 hurricanes that they had to deal with not that long ago, and the reason why they were so prepared, and I thought did a brilliant job with that, and I think people share that, is because of Sandy and Katrina. And I think that you all are in a much better position than you were because of what 2016 was, and you've really tightened it up there, not only with the instrumentation, the extensive info sharing, but again, Mr. Resiliency himself, making sure that when and if there is an issue, you can deal with it. You have that journalism DNA in there to make sure that, you know, the right communication is going out there. We always said, you know, we're going to have these cyber issues. The question is, how do we deal with it? And part of that is how you're communicating with it, communicating to both the Hill, the stakeholders, the public at large, etc. Bob, can't thank you enough for everything you're doing. Keep up the great work, and we really do appreciate it on behalf of every American out there that's going to participate in this election. We thank you for everything that you're doing.
I appreciate that, Luke. Thanks for having me.